So I'm going to go through this presentation and hopefully give you an overview of the existing law and some ideas about how other First Nations are working with this issue, because it is an issue. Canada legalized recreational cannabis without a lot of consultation with First Nations, forgetting about how jurisdiction works in First Nations, and not giving enough opportunity for First Nations to actually participate in this process. And so what we see now is a pretty failing industry overall, and a source of supply that's probably not meeting the needs of consumer demands. And that's why there's a lot of First Nation opportunity in the black and gray market. Unfortunately, with that unlicensed activity, there's no business services available for these stores, so that criminal organizations. And it's a good way to money laundry, pretty dirty money, pretty dirty money, sometimes harder drug money being laundered in some of these cannabis stores across Ontario. So some First Nations have been proactive, put together moratoriums, put together laws, work for communities that have set up single store operations, knowing that they're not a throughway. Some communities are a throughway and have a lot more opportunity to promote and advance participation. Some know that there's less of a throughway and they have to market differently for the retail stores and maybe have to monopolize that opportunity in order to get the greatest benefit. So the two big threats are the cash, because it's a lack of business services, because these stores are in the gray market or black market and can't open bank accounts, or can only open bank accounts if they misinform the bank manager what the revenue source is for those bank accounts. Or the other one is cannibalization, which is happening in different communities where there's no rules. And so what happens is a store opens, a second store opens, a third store opens. There's not enough market, so the second store starts doing things that are more risky. The first store starts following suit. That cannibalization activity results in all kinds of different things happening, including the stores not shutting down, open 24/7, other things happening in the store, other things being sold in the store. So that cannibalization process is real risk if you don't regulate cannabis in your community. So the law was finalized on October 30th, 2020, and there was a plan to finalize the regulations soon after that, which didn't happen. There is a draft regulation, and it's based on a certain model, and this model came out of the Mohawk communities, Ganawake and Akwesasne, other communities that were larger and certainly were through fairs, where there was a lot of sort of 401 traffic available for a larger market, and so allowed for like a more robust regulatory entity. That may not be the case for Nawash. We may want to have a smaller regulatory authority. In my home community, Kujichain, we have a small commission, but it's closely connected to the chief and council, and they regulate through authorizing the supply. So basically, they have a look at first instance at the supply coming in, and they regulate it is meeting the standards within their law, and then through supplier agreements, we'll recognize that the supplier is doing some form of due diligence in order to make sure that there's a safe supply available to that single store in the community. And that single store has a neighboring, there's 3 OCS supplied stores in the neighboring town of Fort Francis, and 2 of them have already closed their doors because they can't compete with the Kujichain store. That might be the same with Nawash here. There are other stores opening, as you see in different municipalities. There's one in my neighborhood in Toronto. that's so-called Mississaugas of the Credit authorized stores, not authorized by Mississaugas of the Credit, but it's under the old Vancouver model. So they take names of the consumers as if they were medical cannabis patients. There's all kinds of liability and risks associated with the Vancouver model. I wouldn't suggest that that's an opportunity. It's actually full of liability issues, and so I assume that you're going to start seeing those stores also being shut down sometime soon. But one of the things that was on the to-do list with NAWASH 3 years ago was that we were going to actually meet with Ontario and Canada and have bilateral meetings so that we would have MOUs recognizing your law and your regulation. And once those MOUs come, because we see this in BC, once these agreements and government recognition happens, then the banks start doing businesses with your licensed stores. Then the insurance companies start being able to insure your stores. It's a recognized license. And so that's potential, that's a possibility. We're also seeing that happening now in Saskatchewan. Some of the clients that we work with there. So there's different things on the menu. It's not the same as in 2018 when we thought maybe the most viable option would be a more robust governance style with a commission that is overseeing a law and a pretty robust regulation. Maybe it's a different model now. So the strategy for NAWASH was to do something. A lot of First Nations just basically turned a blind eye and allowed the cannabis activities to grow. And again, the cash attracted certain folks. There's lots of stores that open up where it's that the actual member isn't really the store owner, it's somebody else in the background. And maybe with criminal connections in order to get certain types of supply. And then the cannibalization activity started happening. Start seeing riskier things happening. The products start changing. The prices start going down. The quality start going down to compete on price. All of those things led to a certain, not just an eyesore as far as the stores and the sort of pop-up nature of them, but also as far as the consumer base that was coming into the community. So these licensing regime is just as simple as like a driver's license, right? The driver's license is the carrot. You need to be regulated, you need to meet the conditions, you need to pay for the permit, you need to pay for the license, you need to follow the rules. And the enforcement is done through, similar to a driver's license. You can get your license suspended, you can get your license taken away for a period of time. You may not be eligible for a license in the future. So those are all the types of enforcement processes that are in your law. The bonus would be that NAWASH should be able to convince both the province of Ontario and the government of Canada that this is the best regime for NAWASH, and that recognition would bring in business services for your stores, so they could operate as businesses, not in a gray market, but as any licensed cannabis store, and be able to hire employees and not pay them in cash, training employees for legitimate careers, and offer consumers the certainty that the product is safe and the labels are reliable. So the Ontario Cannabis Store has also been given a mandate to try to become the supplier for some First Nation stores across Ontario, and so have talked to First Nations about opening up a licensed cannabis store in the community. They've also done this with LCBOs as well. They've been talking to a lot of communities about having agency and LCBO stores in the community to provide like a safe source of supply and to deal with issues of gray markets, both in alcohol and in cannabis. And they're offering the same type of value. They're saying we will provide you the same products at a lower price than the municipal store gets, so you can actually compete, given that you're a little further away from market. you can still compete because they can, the consumer will get a price advantage by going to your store. But you'll have the same access to the supply that both the AGCO offers to LCBO agency outlets as well as to OCS supplied cannabis stores. The other part of the spectrum is actually working with Health Canada, and I made an appearance at the Senate and talked at length with the Indigenous senators about how to fix the Cannabis Act, which is the federal legislation. And one of the main things is we need to regulate what used to be called personal growers. So under the old medical cannabis regime, these are in fact who are the people who are supplying First Nation stores across the country. A lot of them are large grey market suppliers in BC. I know one company that supplies a Sudbury wholesaler, and that Sudbury wholesaler supplies at least 80 stores in First Nations across Ontario. And so that supplier would really like to be licensed, right? Working under the cover of night it's not a healthy way to run a business. It's very stressful. So what Health Canada is considering, and we'll see, especially with the Minister of Health Canada now being changed, I think that there's more of an openness to think about a regulation under the Cannabis Act, where these former personal suppliers can actually supply First Nation stores who are licensed by First Nations. So that's on the menu now, and that's almost brand new, only a few weeks old. So the other thing that I was directed to do as part of the cannabis law was to make sure that the cannabis law is strictly about commercial cannabis opportunities. So there's a recognition in the law under Section 11 that personal use, medicinal use, that is not being regulated by NAWASH's cannabis law. So that's in that section. So if there's a personal individual need to access cannabis, that is not regulated by the laws of NAWASH. Just to make that super clear. Yes. Yeah, so if you have a medical need and you have a medical prescription, you would use the normal sources of access to medical need, like accessing a personal supplier or a personal grower, which is under the medical, it's under the Cannabis Act. There's a specific medical regulation for access to medical cannabis. But you can also go to your neighborhood cannabis store and access cannabis for the purpose of meeting sleep needs or other needs. Yeah, so actually what a lot of us say now is simply adult use cannabis. So anybody over the age of 19 in Ontario, including with the NAWASH law, anybody over the age of 19 wants to access cannabis from a licensed cannabis store may do so for any purposes that they wish. Or they can go the medical cannabis route and go online to a licensed producer and build their prescription for medical cannabis in that way. So, yeah, so that's not really any of the mischief that this law is trying to solve. So what this law is trying to solve is it's basically focused on the stores or dispensaries and making sure that if any store or dispensary that's selling, commercializing cannabis for adult use, they need to be licensed. That's basically what this law says.